Hello everyone and welcome back to Quickflicks Quarantine Binge Edition. In this video, I'll be talking about 7 different movies, each of which will have a link to the Letterboxd review in the description below, in case you wanted to know my full-ish thoughts on each of the films. I'm going to go from least favorite to my favorite films of the past 2 months. And these are films that I watched while I was also trying to watch the 2020 films I still had to catch up on for my 2020 best films list, which I will make a video on next month. But suffice to say, these movies, some of them were good, some of them are bad, and let's start off with the worst one. To be honest, I was tempted into making a full video for this specific movie to talk about my main issues with the film, but I kind of decided just to give my brief thoughts here and then later down the road make a full video. It might not be till around April or May that I get around to doing this because I'm doing other things, but suffice to say, Music is definitely, hands down, one of the worst movies of the year. It's offensive in its depiction of autism, mostly because it's such a stereotypical depiction of autism. The whole non-verbal autistic person thing is still a real thing, but it's constantly used as the poster child of what autism looks like, when in fact we have creators out there that have autism that don't exhibit those traits, such as David F. Sandberg, or even Dan Harmon, or even Dan Aykroyd, all of which have autism in a way, but they don't have the mute autism thing. But suffice to say that media representation of autistic people hasn't necessarily been the best in terms of, well, any representation. You either get this depiction that's in Music, or the Servant that's in various other pieces of media out there. And there's no real middle ground between the two, and that's kind of unfortunate, because autism is a spectrum, and the film itself, oddly enough, for a movie that's supposed to be centered around an autistic character, is set in the background so often, and is used as a piece of window dressing for the true main character, and that is Zoo, who, by the way, the person that plays her has a very beautiful singing voice. I think the music in this is pretty decently produced, but I also think that the musical segments of this film pretty much contrast heavily and clashes heavily with the dramatic stuff that's in the film, and pretty much makes the whole thing just feel incoherent. And I actually did some research before watching this movie, and apparently Sia wanted to make this a drama, but then partway through decided to make it into a musical, which ballooned the budget from $4 million to $16 million, which is a lot of money to really be asking. And I will give credit to her to try to work with someone with autism, but apparently she thought it was quote-unquote too cruel for her to work with this person because she was having a hard time on set, and she decided to work with one of her fellow collaborators from her previous music videos in order to create this character, which is not a very good character. It's definitely not a great character, but there you go. There's some backstory for you. But if that wasn't necessarily bad enough, the fact that Sia did not want to work with this mute autistic person because she thought it would be too hard for her to continue kind of tells you something about the behavior of the director when other people have worked with non-vocal autistic people before in a better fashion. I mean, I'll talk about this more in my full review, but there is a comparison between Sia's Music and Disney Pixar's Spark Shorts film Loop, where they actually did work with a non-vocal autistic person to basically record from home in her natural environment. The fact that they wanted to make her feel comfortable in recording. But I'll get around to that comparison when I do my full review of the film. But the film also tries to have so many different, drama things. It's like trying to have so many different Oscar tropes. This movie is basically made for the Oscar voter that wants to be involved in the conversation. This film has so many different topics that it's just throwing at you, like alcoholism, drug abuse, so many different things, and it's just it wants to have its cake and eat it too in terms of having social relevancy, and it's just desperate for it, and it just comes off as all hollow because there's no commitment to any of these things, and it just rings hollow for any effort for this film. But suffice to say, Sia's Music is one of the worst films of the year, And I'll be talking more about this movie later on when I actually do a full dissection of this film. And no, I did not pay for this film. I had someone pirate it for me so that I could watch it. I did not want to give my money to this person. So there you go.
It's the little things, Jimmy. It's the little things that rip you apart. It's the little things that get you caught.
Starring Denzel Washington, Rami Malek, and also Jared Leto, who's, well, now Joker Jesus, apparently. This film follows some investigators who are trying to solve this murder case and to try to catch this serial killer, and it's basically every other serial killer movie that you've seen from the past 2-3 decades. It has a charismatic serial killer who's pretty hard to figure out because of, vague words and tellings that this person has. You have this investigation that pretty much drives them crazy, and it has elements of things like Insomnia and Seven, but unfortunately both of those movies are better than this movie. The Little Things is too concerned with the little things and just doesn't focus on being entertaining. A lot of it is just dull, boring, and just, quite frankly, snoozing. And the fact that Denzel Washington in this movie doesn't necessarily give, his 100%, he just phones it in, doesn't help much at all to sell this film. I don't think it's on HBO Max anymore because it was one of those 1 month and then it's out the door sort of things, but The Little Things is not a good movie. It's boring, it's kind of a lesser version of a lot of other serial killer investigation type films, and that's kind of upsetting.
Can't wait to start!
This movie comes to us from Studio Ghibli and marks the first CG animated film from them. And I will give credit where credit is due. I will say that for them trying out something new for their animation studio, a studio largely known for traditional hand-drawn animation, here with the CG animation, they do a decent, bit, but when compared to other films such as Lupin the First, there's definitely a night and day difference. The film itself has this weird problem with the story structure. The fact that this film has a first act and a second act, but it just stops when things are getting interesting. And this film is only running about 74 minutes or something like that. It was like less than an hour and a half. And the fact that this film ends in a way that's very anticlimactic, you don't really get a sense of what is really going on with this. It's just about a girl who gets adopted by this witch and this other thing, and she annoys the crap out of the witch to try to learn magic, and everything just kind of boils to a head. Earwig as a character is so unforgivable. She's not a very good character, and she has a friend. She talks about her friend all the time that lives in this orphanage she used to be at. But then, when she leaves, she doesn't even say bye. And then throughout the rest of the film, she's like, I want to go back to see my friend. I want to see all this. And I'm like, you never cared about in the first place. You keep bullying people to get what you want. You're such an idiot. And then they have this whole, setup where, Earwig's mom is being chased by, this one character, I guess. This council of witches or something like that. And she has to put Earwig up for adoption. And that never comes back into play whatsoever. In fact, the mother doesn't even show back up till the very end of the movie and says, Merry Christmas, and then credits. It feels unfinished, and it's just very disappointing to me. I would have loved to have a film that has a start, middle, and end, instead of start, middle, and then But in any case, Earwig and the Witch is probably one of the more disappointing films out of my whole watch list here.
Hold on to me for dear life.
Now, here's the thing. I am always for films that are made in very low budget, environments. The fact that this film was made in the pandemic is something to marvel at, but also kind of question about because, movies being made in this pandemic are kind of iffy. And Malcolm and Marie is no exception. I will give props for them using this time to make a very economically friendly movie in terms of the locations. There's only one real location in this movie, and they utilize it to its extreme. It's basically couples therapy throughout the entirety of the movie, only there's no therapist, and you're losing your goddamn mind. Every time there's something that one character says, it comes back later in the form of a retort later on in the film as another jumping off point for discussion or argument. And it's basically one long argument between two people, and it's pretty much stress-inducing. But the thing that doesn't necessarily work here is that the film itself is very pretentious. It's a film that wants to talk about so many different things, but yet has very little to say about any of them. And I'll give credit where credit is due. I'm glad that John David Washington and Zendaya pretty much wanted to do this film with the director, so I guess that's pretty cool, I guess. If you want to know more about it, I think Karsten Rundquist did a pretty good breakdown as to why this film didn't work, and I pretty much agree with it. It's not a good film, mostly. It's shot well, it's acted well, and it's edited with a sense of anxiety that makes the film very emotionally tense. But once you start to think about what they're saying and who's actually saying this, I don't know if it's necessarily great.
It's birthday time!
I enjoy a man of few words.
If you've ever wanted to see Nicolas Cage punch an ostrich, there's your movie. This is a movie that's basically Five Nights at Freddy's again, because, you know, we had things like the Banana Splits movie earlier on a couple years ago, and now we have Willy's Wonderland. Willy's Wonderland follows Nicolas Cage as he plays a silent protagonist character who, after a car incident that involves his tires getting flat, has to go clean up Willy's Wonderland, a former amusement sort of entertainment center, I guess. And he has to fight animatronics. And there's also a group of arsonists who also want to burn down the building because of its shady past. And yeah, it's basically Five Nights at Freddy's. But I think the thing that I really like about the film, it's not a good film at all, but it's through its schlock and stupidity that I've actually ended up enjoying it. And I think it's kind of fun. It's a dumb, fun film that pretty much I think some people will like. If you're a fan of Nick Cage, he does go pretty fucking wild when it comes to beating the ever-loving crap out of the animatronics. And there's some legitimately fun songs in this movie, some of which are not so good, but some of them are pretty good. I think the cinematography at times is pretty good, but partly, you know, it looks kind of ugly on the outside. But the film itself, yeah, I think Willy's Wonderland is a pretty fun, dumb movie. And yeah, there's my recommendation for it. It's not good, but it's, you know, not terrible either. I'm just waiting for an actual Five Nights at Freddy's movie to actually come around so that we could stop these knockoffs from happening.
Ulysses.
This movie follows Flora as she's kind of a cynic of sorts. She describes herself as a cynic because of the fact that her parents are broken up, apparently, and her world is full of comic books. And one day, she meets a squirrel who gets sucked up into a vacuum, and she saves its life, and somehow it develops powers and becomes a family film about, you know, family and bond and learning our superpower, and it's fine. It's a fine film. It's not going to win any Oscars. It's just kind of there. I would liken it to a lot of early 2000s, early 2010s family films such as Diary of a Wimpy Kid, where you have the main character who's pretty smart, but has these fantastical things that happen around them that, you know, things happen. I think Ben Schwartz is pretty cool, I guess. He's a really cool father figure. And in this film, he's like a comic artist who never got his shot to fame, I guess. But the film itself doesn't necessarily like stand on its own. I think it's just entertaining for like one sit through. But other than that, it's fine.
Anywhere there's people, there's power.
And last but not least, we have Judas and the Black Messiah, easily the best out of all of these movies. When it comes to films about the civil rights movement, a lot of them have been focused on people like, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. But here we actually get to follow Fred Hampton after Malcolm X has died. And pretty much the new black revolutionaries were in Chicago, Illinois. And it follows Lakeith Stanfield's character as he is recruited by the FBI to spy on Fred Hampton, who has been making waves with not only the black community, but also poor, low-income communities as well, to stand up and be part of the Rainbow Coalition, which was a thing back then. And yeah, this is a pretty good drama. I think for the most part, the acting is really solid, especially from Daniel Kaluuya, who gives a very fiery performance that's reminiscent of the late Fred Hampton, and is pretty much embodied of him. When you look back at the tapes and you compare it to Daniel Kaluuya's performance, there's a real connect between the two. Lakeith Stanfield does a really good job trying to play it safe as a FBI informant who's trying not to expose himself as an FBI informant, but yet doesn't necessarily want to be an FBI informant once he gets to know Fred Hampton more. And it's a really good drama that makes you really think about what could have been if he didn't decide to, assassinate Fred Hampton. It's a really good movie, and I think it is one that, was perfectly timed for its release because February is Black History Month, and it's definitely a film that a lot of people will like. I think it's a really good movie, so definitely check that out if it's still on HBO Max. I think it's on there for the next month, but there you go. And that has been what I watched between the months of January and February while I was trying to write my best list of 2020. It was a pretty decent month. A lot of films weren't good, but there were some films that I actually found to be really, really good. And that's all I have to say. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hopefully it's the Tom and Jerry review on Friday. I'll see you then. Peace.